Serious, overnight hikers, hunters and outdoors people of Reddit, what creepy things have you experienced in the forest? Part 1? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. I was solo camping the Chattooga River. It was maybe midnight when I felt my hammock start to shake violently. I poke my head out and it's a goddamn raccoon trying to steal my boots. This was my first time solo camping and I nearly shit a hole through my pants. And it didn't end there. Those little gremlins tormented me all night long, constantly trying to steal my shit. Moral to the story, don't feed the animals, people. I was elk hunting in Washington state a few years ago. As I was side-hilling a small canyon, I experienced the old cliché of an odd feeling and being really uncomfortable. I headed up to the ridgeline and eventually met up with another hunter coming down the ridge very quickly. He waved me down and informed me that he had been watching me through binoculars and that I had walked directly under a tree with a mountain lion in it. Apparently I walked right under it and it simply watched me. Guess he wasn't hungry. Not so creepy, but an unnerving feeling. Backpacking in the woods with a group. I'm a bit of an insomniac, so I was up far after everyone else. We wanted to pack as light as possible and it was summer, so we just had a tarp on the ground and put our sleeping bags on top of it. So we are completely out in the open. It was after midnight and I was still tossing and turning. Then I hear footsteps. I had heard a deer, coyote or something else with 4 legs running through the brush earlier, but this was definitely bipedal. What? Whoever it was came right to the edge of the clearing, about 15 feet from us. I could just barely make out a shadow of the figure, but it was pitched black out and hard to tell what it looked like. It looked like it was swaying side to side, or looking around the clearing. Then it turned and rushed into the woods, and I heard the running footsteps. Once they faded into the distance, I finally felt like I could breathe. I was considering waking someone up. Then I heard the most blood-curdling scream from the direction the thing went. I shook my friend awake, who was more experienced and familiar with the area. All he said was, "Dude, it's just a fox, go back to sleep." I told him I heard the footsteps and saw it and it was not a fox, but he just dismissed it completely and insisted I go back to sleep. I sat there for what felt like forever, feeling paranoid and scared, until I just gave up and took an extra dose of my sleep meds because I figured the anticipation was worse than being killed in my sleep. Went deep sea kayaking off the Carolina coast. We would camp on the various islands. It was so ungodly hot, even under our tarp was unbearable. I'm from Georgia and am used to our summers, but this was something else. I spent about 6 hours just standing in the water one day, attempting to stay cool. The next morning there were literally dozens of sharks feeding on fish. They would ride the waves onto shore and flop around until the next wave or two would carry them back out. I know sharks are overhyped and will most likely leave you alone, but it still felt bizarre that I literally spent hours just marinating in the ocean and they were probably all around me. Quick side note, there were wild horses on the island as well, which was neat. I was in Yellowstone with my wife. We biked about 4 miles to this geyser off the main road, so nobody else was around. While waiting for it to go off, we started hiking down by the river nearby. As I walked past a big tree with low-hanging branches, I see on the other side of the tree, just a few feet away from me, a big brown fur head with a big black eye staring at me. For a split second I thought it was a grizzly bear and it scared the shit out of me. It ended up being a bison just sitting there for some reason. But fucking A. I was whitetail hunting in northern Michigan. It was getting dark and I saw a large black mass move into my bait pile. First I thought it was a black bear, which isn't uncommon. I soon realized it was dog, wolf-like but way bigger than any damn dog or wolf I have ever seen. It was pure black and its fur seemed wispy. I sat there closing my eyes hard and opening them again, trying to disprove what my eyes were telling me, but I simply couldn't. It walked in and out of sight in the matter of 2 minutes. I was scared shitless and hung my stuff up for the year after that. Was hiking along the north shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota. If you've never been, it's really thick old growth forest. There's a approximately 360-mile hiking trail from Duluth to the Canadian border, really well-developed campsites and enough traffic that I wouldn't feel unsafe on it anywhere. For this particular trip, my hiking buddy and I, wanted to turn it into a loop instead of an out and back on the same trail. Scoped out a section that's connected with some back roads and a snowmobile trail that would work as our loop. As we're hiking on one of the dirt back roads, see a random dirt biker approach us, stop maybe 100 yards back, and stare for a while. kinda unnerving with him just staring at us for a while, but he eventually turned and left. We eventually get to a log shelter on the snowmobile trail that we planned as campsite 1. Nice relaxing campsite, go to bed. Woke up in the middle of the night, full moon, and I swore there were 2 moonlit silhouettes standing on either side of my tent. Not sure if I dreamed it or it was real, but freaky as fuck. Remember just staying as still, silent as possible for as long as possible. My friend and I were searching for the perfect camping spot for about a year. After trying out quite a few, we found one that seemed perfect. It was about a half-hour walk from any trail or road and on top of a large cliff over a river. We got camp set up and decided to scout out around the area. It was getting dark, so we started heading back, following the sound of the river to guide us when we spotted something. A shack. We stop and look at each other, and decide we better investigate because it is pretty close to where we are going to be sleeping, and this is weird. We get closer and realize it is basically a teepee made from scraps of aluminum and other sheet metal and a tarp. There is an inflated air mattress inside, and wine and whiskey bottles everywhere. There was also porn and a lot of extremely weird objects that someone normally would not have out camping. This place is a couple hours from any town and, like I said, at least a half hour from any road or trail. There were no vehicles parked anywhere even remotely close because we would have seen them in our travels. We came to the conclusion that whoever had been here must have left, and they obviously did not want to be found. Then, on our way out, I noticed the campfire was still smoldering. We got the fuck out of there. Immediately packed up camp and blindly made our way back to the road. Fuck that. I've watched enough horror movies to know that us teenage white boys would not be waking up that morning. Years back, I was out solo backpacking in the Pecos wilderness of northern NM. Camping about 6 hours hike from the nearest pavement way up past Puerto Nambe. I typically used an enclosed camping hammock. Lightweight, bug-proof, packs up small with a rainfly. No need to carry a pad or mat. Just need 2 trees. Easy and perfect for solo. When you're in it, with the full fly on, you don't have any real visibility around you. The top was totally enclosed by bug screen. To get inside, you sort of climbed into a slit in the bottom, and then your weight pulled and held it closed. It worked well, but it was a convoluted process to get in and out of. I picked a spot just at the edge of the tree line, so I could cook on the edge of the meadow with a view of Santa Fe Baldy. Ate dinner, cleaned up, bags and trees, looked at probably a billion stars, and then processed myself into the hammock for the night. At some point, in the pitch black, I bolted awake to crunching footsteps in the pine needles around me. It was the kind of awake where you go from fast asleep to instantly hyper-aware, but totally frozen. I make absolutely no sound. I can't look outside. Lighting a light would only illuminate the hammock like a lamp and leave me totally blind to the surroundings. The crunching continues, as if it's circling the hammock. I'm not sure how long I held my breath. The crunching is right alongside me. I have zero clue what it is. Suddenly, something pushes against the side of my hammock. And in the hammock, that means it pushed against me. I could feel its body heat. This isn't a tent wall, where you can cower away from it. If you lean, the hammock moves with you. Whatever it was seemed to use its snout to nuzzle or root against the side of the hammock, like it was sniffing something out. I was still holding deathly still, trying to come up with a plan to get away. Which would involve trying to slash the opposite side with my knife. The thing pushes again, and slides up the side of the hammock. I could feel the texture of its fur, hide, hair, whatever scraping against the nylon side. I hear a sharp snort, and it crunches away. I'm not sure how long I stayed absolutely still, but at some point, the sun came up. And I ventured into the daylight. I looked around the campsite, and could find no evidence of a visitor. The treeline edge was floored with pine needles, so there were no prints or tracks. None of my other gear was disturbed. The guy lines for the fly were all still tight, and I didn't see any marks on the side of the hammock. Couldn't even find a broken twig. I'm not sure it even happened. I've never slept in a hammock since. I was out camping one night by myself and started hearing voices. I was playing music and it was around 2 in the morning. My grandma's house was about 2 miles down the river and I thought it might have been my grandpa. So I turned off my music so I could tell back, but I heard a dog and my grandma or grandpa don't have dogs. Then I heard someone say, "The noise was this way." This genuinely freaked me out, so I climbed one of the pine trees and sat up there. About 5 to 7 minutes later I saw a flashlight in the distance and saw 2 people walking up. They were both men and there was I believe a husky German hybrid with them. They ransacked my camp and I swear they should have noticed me cause they shined the lights around and pasted right over me. After they left I started to walk home cause fuck that shit. I heard 2 loud bangs. Sounded like a rifle. And I booked it. When I got home I stood in the porch for a second and saw their lights at the edge of the woods. I can assure you I will never camp alone again. It wasn't even hunting season so they shouldn't have even been out with a gun, and if they were it should have been at least a handgun, not a rifle. But I'm still not sure what kind of gun it was. I hate dark forests now though, and I got hella bad paranoia from this. Camping in the bush in Africa years ago. It was a big, semi-permanent campsite with big, rectangular tents you could stand up in, and we were only there for the weekend. My sister and I were in a tent set a little away from the others, down a short pathway. It was a stunning night, full moon, clear sky, and my sister wanted to leave the tent flaps open. No way. Nope. I insisted on closing them. I was woken up several times during the night by lions roaring. It's a sound you only want to hear with something sturdy between you and it. Next morning, a couple of the other campers walked up our little path. They were following lion footprints. It had wandered through the main site, up our path, right up to our firmly closed tent door, walked all around the tent, then walked off into the bush. No arguments about closing up the tent that night. When I was 16 years old, my Canadian Army Cadets Corps got an opportunity somehow to do a Barbados Cadet Corps transfer trip, where a corps of theirs spent a few weeks in Canada and vice versa. It was a 3-week trip, and in the itinerary were a few days in the bush after a fairly leisurely hike around I think the northern part of the island. When setting up camp in a semi-forested area on the edge of a rocky short cliff face, my buddy and I were adamant that it being mid-August in Barbados we'd rather sleep in a hoochie-style tent. Reference. This memory is over 20 years old, and super foggy because I was super little, but here goes. We used to camp at the same spot every year, until we moved. Anyway, this one summer I remember when we were first pitching our tent, the nearest campers came over to say hello and pass on some advice that had been spreading across the campground. Something about bears, and how everyone should haul their food up in the trees or something. I remember the guy offering my dad some spare rope, if he needed any. All seemed fine and dandy. Mom was antsy, but Dad assured her a bear wouldn't come into a campground this busy. On night 2 or 3, everyone was woken to a crash, and the sounds of a car alarm. I remember pressing my hand over my sister's mouth because I was afraid that if she cried the bear would come over. Or something silly like that. There was some distant shouting, and my dad decided to investigate. So he grabbed the tiny little skillet and his equally dis-sized, but in the opposite proportions, flashlight, and exited the tent. I remember rolling over, because there was this little tear I'd discovered the last time it rained. There were a lot of flashlights and people over by the bathroom, where a car's lights were flashing. It wasn't a bear that had been breaking into people's cars and stealing shit all summer. It was a crazy homeless guy who'd been hiding out in the woods. They were actually pretty sure he was the same guy who tried to attack 2 teenage girls at one of the nearby hiking trails a few weeks prior, leading to it being closed for the time being. Breathing. Just heavy breathing right outside my tent, loud enough to wake me up. Not like fat guy going up the stairs breathing. Very large, intense, clear breathing. Middle of the night, no animal sounds, no grunting, no footsteps, just breathing from something large. I loaded my shotgun and pointed it in the direction it was coming from and waited for what seemed like a lifetime, probably 2 to 3 minutes, until it just stopped. I did not sleep the rest of the night and I didn't go out until the morning. No signs of any animals or people in my camp, no footprints, nothing disturbed. Still to this day I don't know what it was. As an experienced hunter who has chased away bears from my camp, one have never been so scared. Not in the night, but when I was a teenager my friends and I liked to explore uninhabited islands. They're called the Thousand Islands in the Indian River Lagoon. We camped, played paintball, pretty innocent fun. One day we decided to explore a new island for a fresh spot. We found a big one, so to save time, I was inserted on the southern end to explore while the others canoed around the island to see what there was to see. The plan was for me to meet them on the north side. That did not happen. The island was hell. Brambles, bush so thick I had to belly crawl through muck. The perimeter was a swamp with dead trees and God knows what lurking under the film of green algae. And then there were the skeletons. As I crawled my way up the island, I came upon skeleton after skeleton. Turtles, raccoons, deer. That's when it hit me. This is an alligator haven. I freaked out and made a break for the open water, not wanting to die. I yelled out as loud as I could, and fortunately my friends heard me and paddled furiously out to me. I had made it only 1/3 of the way up the island and was thankfully extracted. We named that one Hell Island, and never returned. Not exactly hiker, hunter, etc., but I was walking back to my parents' country house a bunch of years ago. It was this time of the year, so it got dark pretty soon. I was around 16 years old and coming back from meeting friends. 1 kilometer remaining of walk, on the other side of the road I saw a lantern, couldn't see any details of the person however. Seconds later, she aims at me with the light for what I felt so long, then it gets turned off and disappears in the darkness. I don't think I have ran faster in my life. I was at a rest stop somewhere in Nebraska or South Dakota along I-29 and I couldn't sleep, so I was kinda roaming around, checking out the rest area ground. Behind the facilities was some woods. A black lab-looking dog came out and sat down, and watched me. I kept my distance and it would reposition when I paced to keep me in front of it. I finished my cigarette, and pulled out my phone, and the dog stands straight the fuck up on its hind legs like a person and walks backwards into the woods. I'm sure I was just wrong and it wasn't a dog, but I went right back to the car and didn't sleep until we were on the road again. Back in mid or late October, I was camping on the San Juan Islands off the Washington coast, in the little inlet that separates the Olympic Peninsula from the rest of Washington. My last night before returning to the mainland, I stayed in the campground in a state park on one of the islands. That campgrounds happened to be just a miles or so away from the highest point in the rather hilly archipelago. Hiking to the top of Mount Constitution was the main reason I went back to that island before finishing my time on the islands, but I was initially just planning to do it whenever I happened to wake up the next morning. But that evening as I lay in my tent, I realized it would be really cool to watch the sunrise from the top. So I set an alarm for 4 a.m. I figured that would give me plenty of time to be on the trail by 4:45. Figure it's roughly 2 hours to the top. That would get me to the summit right around first light at 6:45 before the 7:15 or 7:30 sunrise. I forgot that the batteries in my headlamp were nearing the end of their life. My headlamp was pretty much useless in actually seeing where I was going, although it did cast just enough light to reflect off the eyes of all the animals watching me through the woods. Presumably just deer, but it still freaked me out. The entire 2 hours, I was constantly noticing them. It was never just a single pair of eyes, either, but always 2 or 3 animals together. They never made a noise, never even moved. Just stood there watching me. My other really freaky experience happened a few years ago. My dad and I loaded some camping gear onto the back of our bicycles and left out home in Wisconsin to ride around a part of the state for a few days. I don't like paying to sleep on the ground, so about an hour before dark, we'd start looking for somewhere we could disappear into the woods to pitch our tent for the night. On I think the second night, we found a small grass path through the woods that went to a farm field quite a ways off. We pitched our tent to one side of the path, and quickly fell asleep. Until around 2 o'clock that night, when we were wandering up by a sort of snorting sound outside the tent. Every, I don't know, 30 seconds? A minute? We'd hear the noise come out of the woods behind us. Figuring it was likely just a deer whose path from the woods to the farm field we were blocking, Dad and I just started talking loudly to each other about it, hoping our voices would scare it away. When that didn't work, I tried shining my light through the wall of the tent. Eventually I ended up getting out of the tent, waving the light in the direction of the noise, and yelling at it to go away. And then we never heard it again. I never saw so much as a pair of eyes reflecting the light, nor did I hear any plants moving around as it ran away, but the snorting sound stopped. Even though it most likely was just a deer, I had never heard a noise quite like that before. Once we fully woke up, we all regained our wits, but in that brief period where we were only half awake, it was a terrifying noise. About a year ago I was camping along the PCT in Washington. It was late October and getting to around freezing in the middle of the night in the mountains. So there were no other people, which was what I wanted. I got to the trail late and hiked with my dog for a while in the dark with my headlamp. We found a place that was a few hundred feet from a small river. It wasn't loud, but you could hear it. I get to work starting a fire when my dog suddenly starts barking. I'm pretty paranoid, so I keep a 3800 lumen flashlight and a big knife on me. I whirl around and shine the light and grab the knife. Nothing. I sweep the trees, looking for the reflection of eyes. Still nothing. Dogs on alert but not barking. I get back to work and this happens a few times. Each time I grab the knife and light but can't see anything. Eventually I search the brush around the clearing but still nothing, so I go to bed thinking maybe something small. 1 a.m. and I'm woken up by something rustling around outside. By the sound I think it was probably the size of a coyote. I don't get out of the tent. About 3 a.m. I'm woken up by a loud screech and 2 large animals bolting through my clearing. It's cold and dark and most of the way up a mountain, so there shouldn't be anything. I'm a little freaked out, so I grab my knife and listen in the tent. There's a screech in the distance, then nothing. Ultimately I wake up and it's raining, so no prints, and nothing else happened. But sure freaked me out. If I had to guess, I'd say a goat or something with hooves became a midnight snack for whatever was lurking around my sight. Was riding my horse down a trail. Heard a noise, tink tink, like glass. Looked down and saw a mouse in a glass bottle. It couldn't get out. Stopped, tipped the bottle and let the little one go. Was riding my horse down a trail and heard a dog whine. Real quiet. I whistled, it started barking. Rode that way and found the dog. It was a German short-hair hunting dog who had tried to get out of a creek and had gotten his collar hung up in a root. Goodness knows how long he was there. He was skinny. On his last legs, if you know what I mean. Had a collar with owner info engraved. Called them and they were speechless. That dog had been missing for 3 weeks. He surely was in the water that long. Hiking deep into a national forest and I found a campfire in the middle of nowhere at night. Not weird or uncommon by any means. People tend to pop up where you least expect them outdoors. But upon further examination, in the fire was a U.S. Army uniform and what seemed to be some of their possessions. Tried to pull out the wallet with their military ID, but it was pretty much a glob or plastic. Something just felt unnerving about the situation. 1. I'm sleeping in my hammock in the woods off the Appalachian Trail somewhere and am woken up by something walking very quietly under me. It was tall enough to lift my feet up as it went under me, which is terrifying to wake up to in the middle of the night. Probably a deer, but scared the crap out of me. 2. Hiking in Africa with a group of about 8 friends. I felt something behind me, so I turn around and find myself eye to eye with a giant alpha male baboon. I handed over my backpack, which is what he was reaching for, and he proceeded to carry it a few meters away, sit down, and stare at me while he unzipped the zippers and inspected every item. He ate what was food and left the rest. He then proceeded to stalk, chase us all the way out of the gorge, coming back twice for more stuff. We tried scaring him off and even pepper sprayed him in the face, but he just shook it off. It was one of the most awesome and terrifying experiences of my life that I hope to never repeat. Camping with my dad in this crazy bush area where you had to hike about 2 hours to this main waterhole. We inflated a boat and went to a small island where the front of the island was sand but the back all bush, so we put our ents up and went fishing. Cooked some fish and ate marshmallows when we heard a howl. It sounded far away, but it scared us, so we got enough firewood for the fire to burn all night, so if you needed to piss or something you could see. No clue what time, but in the middle of the night I had to piss. Went to a tree and stood there. I returned to my tent and heard that howl, but it was very close this time. Before it sounded a long way away. I was scared but went back to sleep. In the morning we woke up to see a small snake trail and our fire in ruins, picked apart and way smaller, even though we had enough wood, because I have been here before and never had problems with running out of wood, and some gear left out, chewed or missing. No clue what it was, but it was weird as hell. Other than that, great spot in Australia. P.S. Currently Australia is in a drought and there is a fire ban, so we can't camp there this summer. Was deep in a state park in North Carolina at a primitive campsite with my mom. We were setting up camp after hiking 15 miles in and it started getting dark. We had a fire going but needed more wood to keep it burning through the night, so we were poking around the perimeter of the firelight picking up sticks. My mom started reaching for a long branch behind a log, but something about it gave her pause. She pulled another stick from the bundle she'd already gathered and hit the one on the ground. It started writhing, coiled up and started rattling at her. We both jumped back and watched as a 7-foot rattlesnake slithered away into the woods. We decided we had enough wood. A number of years ago I was up in the northern end of BC in the islands out by Port Hardy. I set up camp right by the beach close to shore, did the normal catch a fish, cook it for dinner on the campfire thing. Perfect really. A few hours pass and it's getting dark. I climb into the tent and fall asleep quickly. I get woken up by extremely heavy breathing on the beach from something big. In the area of my fire, but the tide was in now, so the waves would have covered it. My first thought is bear, but on the islands where I was, bear were not common at all, to the point that there hasn't been one documented ever. This is blasting though my mind, but then the urban talk of Bigfoot runs through my mind. At this point I am like, there is no such thing as Bigfoot, so what the hell is it? I gain my courage and open my tent. I shine my flashlight around, but I don't see anything, so I get out of my tent. I am shining my light around when I hear it again. This huge breath, but followed by a small splash. I focus my light on the beach when I see a massive orca rolling around on the kelp right about where my fire was. This behemoth of a marine mammal scared the living shit out of it, but it turned into being one of the most amazing events I ever witnessed. As I sat watching this massive animal rolling and playing yards from me, I noticed more of them just offshore, just bobbing their prob, half asleep. Needless to say, I did not sleep after that until they left. We were camping at Long Beach, Washington for the Kite Festival, and decided to take a late-night drive. We found ourselves on some back roads in the woods, cruising along slowly with no music on and the windows down. No other cars but us, and suddenly everything just felt wrong. It was dark, but the light seemed different somehow. I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up and just having the thought, this isn't right, we shouldn't be here. I look over and my wife is wide-eyed and clearly feeling the same way. I decided to pull over so I could turn around and head back the way we came. Then we noticed deer were coming out of the woods and standing on the sides of the road, and they were just staring at us. Realized the woods are oddly quiet, which just made things seem more strange. Look up and the branches were full of birds on both sides of the road. There must have been hundreds of them, all perched and alert. My wife said, we need to go, so we left. Eventually, once we had gone far enough, everything seemed normal again. I'm a pretty big fan of the idea of multiple worlds, dimensions, and honestly wonder if we accidentally drove through a thin spot, and briefly wound up somewhere we shouldn't have been. This was when I was about 17. I camping in the Australian outback with 3 other guys from high school. We each had our own tents. Sometime late at night I get woken up by a clinking sound. Something or someone has just plinked a tin can at our camping site. We took them with us when we left, but they were stacked next to the fire. I sit up and listen. And whatever it is, there's more than one of them. In fact, we appear to be surrounded. I can hear small noises coming from all over the campsite. I'm a bit worried, but finally work up the nerve to stick my head out of the tent flap, and discover it's a herd of miniature deer. None of them are taller than my hip, they look like a herd of Bambi. About 12 of them. One of them sees me and stops for a moment and just looks at me, then they turn tail and run. In the morning there were little hoof prints imprinted all over the camp. I guess they were after the fruits and syrup cans I brought with me. My boyfriend and I were camping in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park, AB, this past summer. On the last night of our stay, as I'm falling asleep, my BF tells me I've been pushing him off his side of the air mattress. I was trying to steal heat from him, as he's a human furnace, and asks me to give him room. Sounds good, we go to sleep. I wake up to him shoving me and think I'm crowding him by accident, so I move over a little. He shoves me harder and I'm annoyed now because I already moved and I'm tired, so I somewhat loudly say, I'm moving. And he grabs B and shushes me. I know something is wrong and am awake right away. He whispers very softly, do you hear something? And right away I hear the unmistakable exhaling huff of a bear right by my head. My heart is pounding because at this point I can hear it sniffing us and huffing, which is not good if you know grizzlies. My BF says we need to get to our truck and I agree, but from what I can hear, the bear is between our tent and truck. Luckily we have command start and our truck has a very aggressive start, so when my BF started the truck, I heard some crashing through the trees and we both ran to the truck. We drove a lap around our campground to make sure the bear hadn't gone into anyone else's sight, but didn't see it. We slept in the truck until it was light out and let the wildlife hotline in the area know before we left. We started second-guessing ourselves because this all happened at about 1:30 a.m., but when we were packing up the tent that next day we found coarse, brown hair all over the side of the tent where our heads were and on the grill of the truck. I've never been so terrified and full of adrenaline in my life. So when I was at least 5, me and my dad went camping. He told me on our way if I needed to go to the bathroom, tell him and he will walk me to the outhouses they had near where we were staying. It was at least 2 in the morning and I woke up having to go to the bathroom, so I tried to wake up my dad. He didn't wake up, so I went by myself. I walk to the outhouse, I look around and see a tall skinny man near the outhouse. I didn't say anything, I just ran back to out tent. I later find out there was an armed criminal in the camping area we were at. This one time I was sleeping atop a mountain in the Italian Apennines. Just me, my sleeping bag and the stars. No tent, no cover. In fact, to be fair, there wasn't even a forest. I was completely exposed to the elements, and that's why it took me some time to fall asleep. But it didn't last long. Just minutes before dawn, I get woken up by what I perceived as a deafening roaring of winds. As soon as I opened my eyes, there it was, mere meters from me. A fucking ginormous eagle flying in circles above me, flapping its enormous wings in what seemed to be a desperate effort to not lose altitude and hit me. Scariest shit I've ever experienced.